Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all back, ready for another season of great music here in Lewis. Tonight's program, Amy Yang from Philadelphia, Curtis Institute professor. And I'm going to do something tonight that I haven't done much of before, and I think you might enjoy, I hope you enjoy, is musical analysis. I think this program lends itself to that because there's such a wide range of music. I'll try not to get too tedious. I know many of you may not read music, but I'll try to make it as clear as I can for you. So I'd like to talk about some of the individual pieces. You'll notice in your program that some of them are played without pause, and I want to address why they're played without pause. At least what I've come to see is why they're played without pause. Amy may have a little bit of different something to say about that, and she told me she will talk a bit tonight. So let's look at the first piece on the program, written just this year by Ted Babcock, Polyphonic Field for Piano Electronics. Ted Babcock is a Philadelphia-based percussionist and composer. He graduated from the Boston Conservatory and also the Curtis Institute. And reading from his website, quote, "As a composer, his works ride the boundaries between conceptual electronics, percussive counterpoint, and an instinctual lyricism." And here's what he says about this work. "My main influence in writing this work were from the movement number 1 of Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit, as well as La Valse. Ravel's usage of long lines over the perpetual motion figures is a profound inspiration to me. His music for piano is simultaneously melodically simple, yet technically virtuosic. Setting out to write this work, I knew I wanted to write a piece that eventually achieves this balance, but through a slow build-up. As for La Valse, Ravel depicts an older form of the waltz and pushes it past the brink of intelligibility. I hope to take a similar approach from this grand virtuosic piano repertoire with its capacious and rollicking arpeggios and runs and push it past its limits by distorting the pitch language using clusters and unexpected changes of harmony, which are underlined by the electronics." Well, now, I have no idea what we're going to hear. It's such a new piece, and I'm sure nobody here has heard it. But just to give you an idea of some of the pieces that he used as an inspiration, the Ravel pieces. Ondine is first movement from Gaspard de la Nuit. Gaspard is a Persian word that means man in charge of the royal treasures. But in this usage, I think it means master. So, de la nuit, master of the night. And there are 3 movements in this piece, and they're all kind of dark. So dark and mysterious. And Ondine is the first movement. It's a tale of a water nymph who lives under the water trying to seduce people down to the bottom, down to the depths. And what you'll hear in this piece are these rippling motives over top of a long line in the bottom, which he says is one of his inspirations. So here is part of Ondine. Hear the rippling above the main melody in the bottom. The other piece he says he pushes past the brink of intelligibility is La Valse. This is a grand piece by Ravel. starts off not quoting, but playing a waltz from the Viennese time. But then it builds and builds and builds, and well, let's just play the first part. And hear the waltz. Here again, you hear all this florid filigree all around the main theme. And then he, as he says, pushes it past the brink of intelligibility. And I think you will agree. Sure, you couldn't recognize any of the waltz in that. And so hopefully this shows a little bit about what you might hear, but at least these are the pieces that he took his inspiration from. The next piece I want to talk about is Chopin Barcarolle. Barca is Italian for boat, and the Barcarolle is a traditional folk song that's sung by the Viennesian gondoliers, and it has motives in it that imitate the way the rocking of the boat, the water, and the oars going through the water. It was a popular idiom used all the way back into the 18th century by composers such as Weber, Rossini, Donizetti, Schubert, Mendelssohn, Bartók, and Tchaikovsky. And one of the most famous ones, I'm sure you all know this one. Very famous. You can hear the rocking. Dum, 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 dum. Going back to the Chopin, this is the only form of barcarolle that he wrote in 1846 when he was already quite ill. It's one of his last large-scale works. He died 3 years later after composing it. He had never been to Vienna or to Venice, so I'm sure this is just an imaginary picture that he's drawn. But there are limitations to this form in that you kind of have to keep this rippling effect going throughout the whole piece. So it can inhibit your invention. It's not like you're doing a symphony that doesn't have one rhythm that goes the whole way through. You've got to kind of take this rhythm and make it run the whole way through. So here is the first part of the Chopin Barcarolle. Hear that repetitive undulation underneath, and that goes the whole way through the piece. He was very proud of this work. He played it a lot on his concerts, and he played it at his last concert in Paris in 1848. And there were reports of him being so frail when he played it that he could hardly play above a pianissimo. And there was one observer wrote, He played it from the point where it demands the utmost energy in the opposite way, pianissimo, but with such wonderful nuances that one remained in doubt if this new rendering were not preferable to the accustomed one. And so here is the expansive sections that he said were played pianissimo. So I think that's how we'll hear it today. I don't think we'll hear it pianissimo. The next work by Brett Dean. This was written in 2013. Brett Dean is an Australian violinist violist. He played in the Berlin Philharmonic viola for 14 years. When he left the orchestra in 1999, he devoted himself to composing and teaching. This is part of a piece, Homage à Brahms, that was written for Emanuel Ax. There are 3 movements, and they were meant to be interpolated between the Brahms 4 pieces, opus 119. Engelsflügel, any German speakers here? No? Yes, what is Engelsflügel? Angel's wings. Angel's wings. He said he wrote these out of thinking about writing a piece where there's something absent. And you'll hear there's very definitely something absent in this piece. It's very spare. You have 2 repeated chords that repeat the whole way through, and there's hardly anything in between. But gradually he fills that in, almost like a set of variations. You know, you set out to write a set of variations. You have a theme. You state the theme, but then you vary it, enlarge it, expand it, and that's essentially what he does with this. The piece is only 2.5 minutes long. So I'm not going to play the whole thing. I don't want to spoil it. But this will give you an idea of what it is. So it goes, as it goes along, more and more of these spaces are filled in. Now the next piece, Schumann, Geistervariationen, Geister, ghost or spirit. So you can see what could be the possible connection between these two, angel and spirit or ghost. And there's an interesting story behind these, the ghost variations. And well, almost every piece by Schumann, there's a story. But this was the last piece he wrote before he admitted himself to a mental hospital. He claimed he was surrounded by ghosts and spirits who played music to him, as he said, both wonderful and hideous. They offered him most magnificent revelations, he said, but threatened to send him to hell. So in 1854, Schumann wrote down this theme that he said was dictated to him by these voices. Now, as an indication to his mental state at this time, he didn't realize or recognize that he had written this piece a year before and used it in his violin concerto. So let's hear how it comes into the violin concerto. A little bit different, but it's definitely the same thing. So after he wrote this down, he started to write a set of variations on this theme. And while he was working on them, tried to commit suicide by jumping into the Rhine. He was fished out, went back home, and finished the variations. The next day, he sent them to his wife, Clara, who had left him the night before on the advice of a doctor. It's not hard to find this theme in all of the variations, except when you get to variation 5. But as you become more familiar with the theme, you can find it there. But I think the most interesting variation is Variation 2. It says, canonische, cannon, like a cannon. Row, row, row your boat is a cannon. Three blind mice is a cannon. So let's hear this. It sounds just like the theme. But why do I think this is interesting? Well, if you look at it, the top line is the same as the bottom line. It just starts a beat later. Here is the top line. That's the theme we've heard from the very beginning. Here's the bottom line. Same thing. Now here's both of them together without the intervening harmonies. I think that's pretty ingenious. Here it is. I'll play the whole thing again so you can hear it with the harmonies. Now, there are two more pieces played without pause. Franz Schubert, number 1 from Impromptus, Deutsch 935 or Opus 142. Well, what are those numbers? Opus numbers are assigned to a piece when a publisher publishes it, so he can keep things in order. Deutsch, where you get the D numbers, was a musicologist in the late 19th century who decided he wanted to put all of Schubert's works in chronological order. So they didn't necessarily jibe with the opus numbers because opus numbers are just when they're published, not when they're written. So the Deutsch numbers are in a chronological order. So a lot of times you'll see both opus numbers and Deutsch numbers to Schubert. Schumann had great admiration for Schubert. He went to Vienna in 1838 and brought back the undiscovered great C major symphony, took it back to Leipzig, and Mendelssohn had it premiered in Leipzig. So what do these pieces have in common? Well, first of all, the key. Here's the beginning of the Schubert. Very straightforward classical opening. You could be listening to late Mozart or early Beethoven. It's very stable. It's one thing you won't find in Schumann is this stability. And for much of the time, are we not? Lost the connection, maybe. Oh, went too far now. For much of the time, there's great serenity in this piece. And also, you'll see all these black notes here. Again, that's that kind of rippling effect that we heard in the Barcarolle, in the Ravel. And these repeated notes give it forward movement. It keeps it moving, and it gives it organic structure and stability. And you feel grounded. You don't have the feeling anything weird is going to happen, like in the Schumann. So let's play a bit of this. Very calming. It has none of the angst that you find in Schumann. So we'll contrast that with some of the Schumann that is going to follow. Almost seethes with angst. And for contrast, listen to the end of the Schubert and the beginning of the Schumann. And this is the way they'll be performed. Almost diametrically opposed. I mean, here's this one that just calmly goes to nothing, and then the Schumann comes crashing in from the get-go. There we go. In the summer of 1836, Schumann was in love with Clara Wieck, a famous 16-year-old pianist. But her father tried to put the kibosh on the relationship because he considered Schumann too emotionally volatile and psychologically unstable. So he sent her on a concert tour hoping that this would kind of cool the relationship. But in Schumann's loneliness, he composed this sonata, and he wove her into the fabric of the piece. Okay, so here's the beginning that you heard before. So here Schumann is nailing his colors to the mast. This piece is going to be about Clara. And this is the Clara theme. And I'll get into that a little bit later in more detail. It's this 5-note descending scale. Bum ba dum bum bum. And bum ba dum. That dotted rhythm carries itself all the way through the piece. This figure appears in all the movements in various forms, except I found it difficult to find it in the last movement, if it's there at all. But we're told it's there by the musicologists. And this is one of the things that musicologists make a career for themselves of, is finding things that aren't there. So you can tell I have very little patience for some musicologists. But Schumann planned a 5-movement sonata, eventually published as 3 movements. There were 2 scherzos that he dropped, and he added a completely new finale. And probably the publisher, Hanslinger, added the Consort ohne orchestra, just as a gimmick, a marketing gimmick. 17 years after he wrote it, he did another substantial revision of the first movement. One of the scherzos was added in as an option, but we're not going to hear that tonight. We'll hear the 3-movement work. The only movement that remained untouched with all this revision was the 2nd movement, the Andantino de Clara Wieck. So let's talk about this Clara theme. It's from her Romance Variée. Let's hear that. Well, you might say that's pretty unremarkable. And you'd be right. But for some reason, the 2 of them identified this motive as having some significance to them. This descending 5 notes. So here's the opening. Here, we're back to the opening again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the 5 notes. But he alters the rhythm on the first one. We're having problems here. Let me try to get back. Yeah, that's an inversion of the theme we heard. You see the dotted rhythm? I mean, it doesn't 1, 2, 3, 4, but there's a skip. For melodic reasons, he varied it. So you'll hear the theme going down, you'll hear the theme going up, the whole way through the piece. There's another way he used the theme is straight notes going down. Hear those. And now we're told by the musicologists that this is the Clara theme, and I guess it was. I mean, I leave that up to you. So let's go to the emotional center of this work, which is the second movement. Now I'm going to play the theme of the Variations movement, and you'll hear the Clara theme at the beginning, and then you'll hear an inversion of it in the second part. Comes the inversion. Now, the theme is recognizable almost the whole way through. It's easy to hear in number 2, but in 3 and 4 it's a little bit more difficult. Here is Variation 3. You can hear it, it's still there, but the rhythm is offset. Now here's Variation 4. You can still hear it. Now the last movement is marked prestissimo possibile, as fast as possible. And then he continues to get faster and faster. But Schumann has this propensity to add rhythms over top of what's going on just to cloud your sense of where the beat is. So let's hear what that sounds like. Where's the beat? Where's the beat? It's interesting, Clara considered this piece, quote, not too incomprehensible. Almost damning with faint praise. But she admitted that she would, quote, play it if necessary. But the masses, the public, and even the connoisseurs for whom one is really writing don't understand it. So I hope with what I've shown you this evening will in some way illuminate it for you before you hear it. I mean, to hear a piece like this cold, I think you lose a lot. But to hear what is going on underneath and have an idea of what you're going to hear, I think that is what, for me, makes music more enjoyable. It's not just an emotional experience, but it's also an intellectual one. So I hope you enjoy the performance tonight, and it's very nice to see all of you here. Thank you.